On the outside, the Sony A6700 might look like a pretty basic wannabe vlogger camera, but under the hood is a magically delicious concoction of AI features, photo capabilities, and video specs that trickle down from the cinema line. And if you can face the facts that full-frame sensors are not as important as you might have been told, well, then you might be pretty blown away with this compact and affordable little beast. Before we get into this video, a quick, brief, sponsored message from PPA, Professional Photographers of America. So they're throwing their annual conference, Imaging USA, this year in Texas, and I'm going there as a PPA ambassador. So if you want to meet, more than that, if you're a PPA member, I'm going to start shouting out you guys. So today, I'm shouting out Jonathan Wade, who signed up recently and sent me confirmation of that. So if you want to send me a little screenshot of your membership, maybe you'll get a shout out. You'll also get up to $15,000 of gear insurance, which is just the best perk, honestly. But there's so much more than that. Contract templates, help with invoicing, pricing, dealing with clients, dealing with data loss. It's a one-stop shop resource for all of your professional photo video needs. Come hang out at Imaging USA. And now I'm gonna get back to talking about A6700s. Personally, I see the A6700 as a remixed FX30. And as with most musical remixes, some things are better and kind of a banger. Some things are worse. And the A6700 is a little bit of both. Mostly banger.
I hardly know her.
Damn it, Michael. Pay attention, man.
It's only $1,400 brand new, and it's being marketed toward mostly online content creators. But honestly, this camera's capabilities punch way above its weight class. Before we get into the juicy features, let's talk about the outside, the materials. Well, the FX30 inherited the sleek, kind of matte gray finish from the FX3 and the cinema line of cameras, but the A6700 inherited the kind of black, rugged, alpha camera body that a lot of people love, and I like it too. But the best part for me is it's ultra compact, but you don't really sacrifice in many areas. And it's built very well despite the fact that it's more of an entry-level mirrorless for Sony. Inside this camera body is a 26 megapixel 6K APS-C back illuminated sensor. And Sony's claiming that you get 14 stops of dynamic range with this camera, which I don't care really about the specific chart. I care what the images look like. And this same sensor is in the FX30, and I used this camera to shoot some stuff a couple summers ago in Los Angeles, and the project I made out there just looked absolutely beautiful. We were using the A7S III and the FX30, and I actually kind of preferred the colors from the FX30 sensor, which is the same one in the A6700, and it just did feel like you had a lot of dynamic range coming from this sensor. Also, editing in DaVinci Resolve kind of feels like a cheat code. If you're exposing your footage well, you can get back a ton of information, and it just looks so good when you dial it in. The sensor, the colors, the image, it looks fantastic. Let's talk about full frame versus APS-C for a second, because this continues to be a contentious topic in our community for some reason. I, a while back, made a long-term FX30 review and explained why I left full frame cameras as my main cameras, because I was getting everything I wanted out of this camera. And Philip Bloom commented on my Instagram post about that and said this, and I can see where he's coming from with his camera. I mean, the full frame A7S III and FX3 are absolutely incredible cameras, but I don't think they overshadow the APS-C counterparts as much as a lot of people think. So here's a couple benefits you're gonna enjoy using APS-C Sony cameras over full frame. Higher megapixel sensor. This is gonna equate to sharper, cleaner photos. And you can definitely tell a difference between A7S III 12 megapixel raw photos versus A6700 26 megapixel photos. There's just more detail. There's more sharpness. If you need that resolution, you're gonna get that out of these smaller cameras. And obviously, Sony makes full frame cameras with super high megapixel counts, but they're extremely expensive compared to these APS-C cameras, which is the other huge benefit. These cameras are way more affordable because they're crop sensor, which means you also get way more affordable lenses that are crop sensor, but you can also use full frame lenses on APS-C cameras. I use my 24-70 2.8 on the FX30 all the time, and it works great. And you'll get a more compact setup if you want to use tiny APS-C lenses, like the Sigma 18-50 2.8, incredible with the A6700 and FX30. One thing you might not like about the A6700 is that it only has a single card slot. Now, some other ports on the camera, you get a micro HDMI instead of full size, so that's kind of a bummer for me, but Most people aren't going to use this with an external monitor probably, so micro HDMI. But you do get USB-C power delivery and data through that, so you can use this as a webcam for live streams, Zoom calls, whatever you can come up with. And you do get a headphone jack and a mic jack on the A6700, which is amazing if you're using this for work and you want to hear what your client is saying while you're filming them. Now, another huge benefit to the A6700 is the fact that it has an EVF. So there's been this weird trend on my channel lately where we've been talking about cameras that don't have a viewfinder. I use the FX30 a lot. I have the Lumix S9, both awesome cameras, but we've been shooting with this thing all day, and there's just something so convenient and classic about just using a camera that has a good viewfinder. And the rangefinder style of this one is so convenient if you want to look in your viewfinder and then open your other eye to kind of see what else is going on. It's very convenient, and despite how small this camera is, the viewfinder is actually very good quality for photo and video. And now I'm just like, man, should I get rid of my cameras that don't have viewfinders? Camera companies, stop making that a trend. One little quirk I noticed, if you're in photo mode on this camera with the screen out and you want to switch to the viewfinder, close the screen, it's actually blacked out in the viewfinder until you half press the shutter, and then that activates the viewfinder. It's kind of interesting. I couldn't find a setting that would disable that and just make it an instant transition, because when you open it back up, the screen is already ready to fire off a photo. When you close it, it's blacked out right now. It's kind of weird. So gotta half press, let it turn on, and then shoot a photo.
That's dumb.
That's actually dumb. I don't know why it does that.
That's really dumb.
Add crack effects. And I do have to say this because I've been saying it in every video. I want the A7R5/GH7 screen design on every mirrorless camera. Sony, please. And one more, I guess, kind of little complaint for me is the menus. They're Sony camera menus. I feel like every camera company just needs to cheat on Blackmagic's homework before the test. I mean, my lord, Sony, clean up your menus and go clean your room. Let's talk about photography performance. Well, this camera has something pretty sweet, and it's an AI chip that originated in the A7R5, but those AI tech features are slowly starting to trickle down into other Sony cameras now. And AI is absolutely a buzzword right now, and all it really means for this camera is that you get more subject recognition and better autofocus performance, which we'll take it. You can focus on cars, planes, comedians, cars, coffee, probably eagles, but also you can shoot up to 11 frames per second burst mode in RAW with this camera. But how about video performance? I feel like that's where this camera gets really fun. What's cool is this camera inherits pretty much all of the video features from the Sony FX30, but it's cheaper and smaller. First of all, you can shoot 4K UHD up to 60 frames per second with the entire width of the sensor, which is very handy. And you can also shoot 4K 120 frames per second, just like the FX30, but it does have a pretty significant crop. So that's one thing to keep in mind. With this particular sensor in video mode, there is a bit of noise in the shadows. There is a couple ways to work around that. The first and most obvious is to shoot in the native ISOs in video, which is 800 and 2500. Now, a native ISO just means that that's going to be your optimal dynamic range on this sensor. So at 800 and 2500, you're going to get pretty clean images with the most amount of information from shadows to highlights. But if you want the cleanest possible footage on this sensor, you actually can shoot at lower ISOs than that. Now, technically your dynamic range is going to go down, but I think this sensor looks so good and you can get a lot back as long as you're exposing well and not blowing things out, that if you want ultra clean results, you could shoot at lower ISOs and just protect your highlights and you should be good. But once you go between 800 and 2500, it's gonna get a little bit gnarly, so I would try to avoid that range if possible. I find that I get the best results if I overexpose by 0.7 or +1 stops. And there's tons of options in the A6700, just like their cinema cameras. You can shoot up to 600 megabits per second, which is great if you're shooting in a profile like this, S-Log3 and S-Gamut 3 Cine, which is how I think you get the best colors out of this sensor. If you don't want to color grade, you can shoot in something like S-Cinetone, which is basically just like a nice looking Sony image baked in, so you don't have to color grade if you want, or you could just do a little bit of post on top of your footage. So you get all the options that the pro video cameras have too. The stabilization is also good on this camera. It's nothing ridiculously amazing. It's not Lumix level, which Somehow Lumix has been able to make the best stabilization even with full frame sensors. And I wouldn't be worried about things like overheating or battery life unless you're running super long takes. The FX30 does have an internal fan, so you can run this thing forever. The A6700 doesn't, so I probably wouldn't get it to just do like 12-hour sessions. I don't know what you'd be shooting, but also you do get a little bit worse rolling shutter performance than the FX30. It's a little bit slower, but I still didn't really notice jello while out and about filming handheld or anything like that, so you should still be fine. One gem on this camera that I found is their little photo video switch that allows you to switch between the two very quickly. And if you're having struggles with the settings reverting back every time you change them from photo, it stays that way for video, you can actually dive into the menus and keep those completely separate. So when you switch to photography, it retained the settings you had last time. Same for video. If you don't want your shutter speeds and stuff changing all the time, dive into the menus and set it up like that so that you can have those be completely separated. And you're gonna love shooting that way. It's very quick. And another thing you might want to do is set up your gamma assist. If you're shooting an S-Log3, you're going to want your gamma assist to show you what a Rec. 709 color graded image might look like. But when you switch into photography mode, that assist for some reason still stays on the screen. So I would recommend setting that assist to a custom button that you can quickly turn off when you switch into photography mode. Otherwise, your photos look way too crunchy because it's thinking the camera's in log and adding a bunch of contrast and saturation. So set your S-Log3 assist to a custom button so you can turn it off and on easily. So what do I think of this camera? Well, it's marketed toward content creators, entry-level shooters, and beginners, but I think it absolutely exceeds the expectations that Sony set for it by inheriting a bunch of settings and features from their higher-end video cameras and their higher-end photography cameras. And if you know what you're doing with a camera, you can get absolutely stellar results from the A6700. If you're looking for your first serious camera to learn on, this is great. If you're looking for a B or C camera to your Sony cinema camera, this is great. Or honestly, if you're looking for your main photo video hybrid camera to use in personal or professional settings, this thing can get the job done reliably and affordably. And if sensor size still matters to you after all of this, well, you might just be insecure. Text me when you get home so I know you're safe. Watch out for deer because honestly, they're the reason we're leaving this house soon and moving to a completely different state where I have to rebuild an entire studio, but it's gonna be super sick and I hope you stay tuned for it. Follow me on Instagram for short and dumb stuff. Join the Discord for some nerdy tech friends. You guys are loved way more than you might know. All right, God bless you guys. See ya.